Lights, camera, action.
Hey everyone.
Hey guys.
Welcome back to our podcast. Today we are on episode 8, but if you haven't checked out episode 7 from last week, I would encourage you to do that because we had our first ever guest, John's brother Josh, and it was a lot of fun just talking with him about the movie Gladiator, and yeah, so go check that out if you haven't yet.
Yeah, we even did some movie trivia. It was a really great episode. Go give it a listen.
So today we are going to be talking about Interstellar, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. If you have not seen that movie yet, I would pause this and go and watch that first because we will be having some major spoilers in this episode that will probably ruin it for you. And I know that if I could go back and watch that movie for the first time again without knowing anything that happens at the end, I totally would. So make sure you do that. So I will go ahead and just start us off with some introductory details. So Interstellar was released on October 26th in 2014. It was directed by Christopher Nolan. It stars Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway, Jessica Chastain, Michael Caine, and Matt Damon. It was distributed by Paramount Pictures and Warner Bros. The runtime is 2 hours and 45 minutes. It was rated PG-13, and its budget was $165 million, but its box office total was $701.7 million.
Very nice.
So it did very well.
Yes. Almost $1 billion.
Yes. So, I didn't find a ton of facts on this movie, but the ones that I did find I thought were pretty cool. So the first one is that, so the robot, or what would you call it? What would you call TARS? Just a robot or a computer?
Yeah, he's a robot.
Okay.
TARS and Case, both.
Yes. So TARS and Case were both actually just giant puppets. They were not CGI or anything. So TARS was actually controlled by Bill Irwin, who was the voice of TARS too. Somebody else did the more crazy stunts and stuff, but Bill did most of the controlling.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, and I know that John has a little bit more on this than I did, but the spacesuits that the actors wore had, they were functioning. So they had a functioning oxygen unit so that the actors could breathe more comfortably during long shooting hours. And then they also had those cooling tubes in real spacesuits, just to kind of, so they wouldn't get overheated and that kind of thing. And John mentioned something else too. What else did they have?
So on the planet where they visit Dr. Mann, which is Matt Damon's character, you see them use these little wrist propulsion devices, I guess you call them. They kind of blow steam out of their wrist as they're jumping to prevent them from taking fall damage, essentially. That was real. They had these little wrist gauntlets that they could press a button that was on their glove that would shoot out all that steam and everything.
Yeah, so lots of different functioning pieces, which was pretty cool. Another thing that I read was that Christopher Nolan actually hired the Nobel Peace Prize for Physics winner, Dr. Kip Thorne, just to help him kind of stay true to science and get all of his facts straight throughout the movie.
So there's a little bit more to it than that. Kip Thorne was actually a producer on the movie before Chris Nolan was ever brought on.
Oh, I must have read something wrong then.
Well, once Chris got brought on, he did hire him as a consultant through the movie, and they continued meeting. But the original idea for the movie actually came from Kip Thorne, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. So you're not wrong, but there's also a little bit more detail to it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So another thing that both of us kind of learned as we were researching for this movie is that Anne Hathaway, her suit actually didn't get zipped properly when they were on the ice planet. And this was filmed in Iceland, and they were in these ice cold waters in Iceland. And because her suit wasn't zipped properly, it let cold water in, and she I read two different things. One said that she almost got hypothermia, and one said she actually did get hypothermia. I don't know if she did or not, but it sounded like Christopher Nolan was like, okay, let's just finish this scene really quick and then you can get medical attention and that kind of thing. So he was pretty hardcore, but she said that it all ended up working out. But
yeah, the reports I read said that she almost got hypothermia, but you don't know how much of that stuff is actually true and whatnot.
Right. So another thing that was pretty cool is that Steven Spielberg actually was almost going to be the director for this movie, but DreamWorks and Paramount split, and so the story belonged to Paramount, so Spielberg couldn't work on the film anymore. But one thing that I found that was really cool is things that would have happened if Spielberg would have been the director, so like different changes to the story. So a few like smaller ones is like Murph was actually going to be a boy. And another thing was that there were going to be these like robots or like probes that were sent to space instead of humans. And also that these like robot characters were more like humanoid, like kind of like they looked like humans but weren't. And then another thing was that TARS was going to be sucked into space while the ship was stuck between two black holes. There were actually going to be two instead of one. And also, the only planet that the space crew was going to visit was the ice planet. But they would have learned that like a Chinese space mission was there way before they came. And all the Chinese people were killed by like radiation of a star, like a neutron star or something like that. And then a few other things. There was a lot that they were going to do instead. One thing was that like a romantic relationship was going to be explored more between Cooper and Dr. Brand. And then Cooper was going to return to Earth in 2230, the year. But it wasn't going to be like this new, whatever thing. It was just going to be like a wasteland. And then I think that was everything that I read that they were going to change.
That's interesting, but I'm glad that it didn't work out with Spielberg, to be honest. No disrespect to him. He's a wonderful filmmaker, a giant in the film industry who formed a lot of, childhood memories for people with E.T. and Jurassic Park, Jaws, a bunch of like huge hitters in terms of cinema, Schindler's List. However, I think there's no better version of this movie than what Chris Nolan did.
I completely agree.
This is one of my all-time favorite movies, hands down, without a question. And everything that they did, in my opinion, is just perfect in terms of servicing the story, being a sci-fi thriller, drama. Like I don't even know. Like it's just such a good movie, and I'm really glad that it wasn't. I'm really glad that it wasn't something where filmmakers were injecting a lot of big Hollywood ideas, so to speak. That this is really just an epic that Chris Nolan and his brother Jonathan Nolan and Dr. Kip Thorne put together.
Yeah, I agree. There is like a small part of me that is curious about what the film would have been if Spielberg actually had directed it, but
yeah,
Christopher Nolan's version, I don't think there's a single thing I would change. It's just so good.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mentioned this briefly earlier, but some of the movie was shot in Iceland, and then some of it was also shot in Canada, like the different planets and that kind of thing. And then one thing that I thought was really interesting was that the interview clips that they use, like when it's like the older people talking about the dust storms,
the very
and that
beginning
kind
of the
thing.
movie,
right?
How the movie actually starts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those were actually from a real documentary that was made in 2012. It was called The Dust Bowl, and it was by Kevin Burns. So I thought
it was
that
on
was really,
PBS, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. It was a PBS documentary about the Dust Bowl that Chris Nolan saw, and he thought it was perfect because they were incorporating aspects of the Dust Bowl era into Interstellar. And so he got permission from Ken Burns to put it in the movie. And it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and it was perfect. It played perfectly into it. And I know also that in an interview that I read up on, they took a lot of inspiration from that documentary for the town that Cooper and his family live in, and just like obviously the dust storms and that kind of thing, that a lot of that came from that documentary. Another thing is that there was actually new CGI software that was developed and created specifically for this movie, which John might have more information on that.
Yeah, I have a lot of info on that, but I'm going to save it for later.
Yeah. And then my last one is that, so while they're on Miller's planet, that's the one that like that's
the
like
water planet.
The water planet,
Yeah.
right? And that's the one that's like, they really hyped it up before they left, like, you know, like if you spend 1 hour there, that's 7 years on Earth. So like be really quick, you know?
Yeah, make it count.
Yeah.
That's actually what Cooper says right before they get out of the ship. He says, 1 hour, 7 years, make it count.
Yes. So in the background of those scenes, you can hear a clock ticking the whole time, which just obviously adds to the suspense and the like craziness of it. But they actually said that every tick that you hear represents 17 hours on Earth. So that was pretty cool.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it totals out to 23 years, right? By the time they actually get up to the Endurance.
Yep.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. So that's all I have as far as fun facts go.
Okay.
So John, take it away.
All right, let's jump into some production details. Now, I will say before we get started that this movie is, as far as research goes, the most information that I've ever encountered, which granted, this is only episode 8, but still, I mean, there was, just on Wikipedia alone, for the production page only, at least a half hour's worth of reading. So there's a lot of stuff in here. I'm not covering all of it. I tried to take out the highlights and what I thought was interesting. So if you're interested in hearing more about stuff, just Google Interstellar production and there's all sorts of stuff that'll pop up. But without further ado, let's jump right in. So I kind of hinted at this earlier, but the original idea for this movie actually came from Dr. Kip Thorne. He's a physicist, a theoretical physicist, I believe. And Linda Obst, I think I'm saying that right. She's a film producer. They worked together on a sci-fi drama called Contact back in 1997. And after that, they kind of kept in contact and they came up with the idea for Interstellar. So they kind of pitched the idea around. That's when they were both, Dr. Kip Thorne and Linda Obst, were interested in hiring Spielberg to direct, but they didn't have a screenplay for it yet. It was just kind of like a short 8-page general overview of the story. So in 2007, they hired Jonathan Nolan to write the screenplay, who is the brother of Christopher Nolan. But then shortly after that time period, DreamWorks and Paramount split. So very interesting. This is a side detail, but Disney actually acquired the distribution rights to DreamWorks for about 5 years, which is really funny because DreamWorks exists because of Disney employees who broke off from Disney. But anyways, because of the DreamWorks and Paramount split, Spielberg could no longer direct the movie because Paramount owned the film rights to Interstellar. So at this point in time, they knew they needed a director. Jonathan Nolan kept working on the script. He worked on it for about 4 years. And during that time period, he kept recommending his brother Chris Nolan to direct the movie. And at this point in time, I mean, he was a mega hit. He had done Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, which took the world by storm. So Paramount hired him. Chris met with Paramount and then talked with Dr. Thorne in 2012 because he was very interested. And he signed on to direct shortly after. He was very excited to direct the movie, citing that he wanted to encourage the idea of human spaceflight. So you have to remember back in August of 2011 is when NASA shut down the space shuttle program. So the funding completely stopped for that. And it was looking very bleak in terms of like a mission to Mars and anything beyond what humans had already achieved in terms of like going to the moon and whatnot. So Chris really wanted to do this movie to encourage the idea of space flight and space exploration because this was a bleak time for that in our history. So he signed on, and then principal photography began on August 6, 2013. They started shooting in Alberta, Canada. They shot in multiple locations, as Emily touched on, and I'm not going to cover those. But production or principal photography later wrapped in December of 2013. And then we'll jump into production design. So in the movie, you have 3 spaceships, the main one being the Endurance. That's like the team's mothership. It's their huge one where they dock their smaller spaceships to. That has 12 space capsules, or not space capsules, just it has 12 capsules, and it's laid flat as it's flying through space, and that was intentional. Chris wanted to have 12 capsules on there, and he wanted it to be flat so that it would resemble a clock. One of the main running themes in the movie is time, and this just kind of integrates that idea even further. And also for the design of the Endurance, they took inspiration from the International Space Station. They wanted everything on the Endurance to be intentional, meaning that there wasn't wasted space, that everything there had a function. So they kind of looked into how the International Space Station was designed for that. And then as far as production design goes, you have TARS and CASE, which you talked about a little bit already, Em. But they are the 2 robots in the movie, and they're very odd. They're basically just big walking rectangles. And this was an intentional design on Chris's part. So he wanted to avoid designing a robot that was anthropomorphic, which is just a fancy word for human-like, something that resembles a human. He wanted to completely avoid that. He didn't really speak to why he wanted to avoid it. I imagine just to keep it kind of grounded in reality and avoid, like Star Wars and stuff like that. So the design for them was actually based on a complex mathematical system. So when you watch the movie, TARS and CASE in multiple instances, when you look at them, they're essentially like 4 rectangles that are kind of jointed together so that they can walk and move and whatnot. But then they can also open their arms, I guess you would say, into 2 more rectangles, which then open into more rectangles. That it keeps going and going until you essentially get like fingers and whatnot. But anyways, that was all based in reality, like a mathematical system of what that could look like. And, if I'm being honest, as weird as it is, I can totally see that being something that was designed by something that would happen in real life. Because when you have things that are designed in science fiction, you kind of have an idea of what it should be. And then when it comes to reality, it's like completely out of left field. It looks totally strange. So anyways.
I also read, because I was kind of reading about the robot making too, and I can't remember who got the idea first, but somebody got the idea for TARS, like what they would look like and how they would, like move and stuff from popsicle sticks.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. So moving on to visual effects, which this ties directly into production design, but I want to section it out because there are some specifics in here. So as far as VFX go, when a movie is made, traditionally, you shoot the movie first and then do all the visual effects like the CGI and everything after the fact. Nolan did not want to do this. So he wanted to have the VFX pre-rendered and projected on the set so that the actors could interact and kind of be in their environment, as opposed to, being in front of a green screen and having to act off their imagination. And it's very interesting that Chris used this technique because this was released in, you said 2014, right?
Yes.
Okay. So they would have been filming in 2013. And this is one of the first instances of doing something like that. Now, today, we have a technology called the volume, which was made famous by The Mandalorian, which is essentially a ginormous, not quite a building, but a room, I guess, where every wall is an LED panel, and you can put a digitally rendered environment in there, and it looks gorgeous. It's indistinguishable for what's captured on camera, and it's really an amazing process. But that didn't come out until I think 2017, 2018.
Something like that.
Somewhere
yeah.
in that neighborhood. So Nolan was way ahead of his time on this one. But it really, the actor said it made a really big difference for them being able to actually see what they're acting with. So on that note, for visual effects, the film had over 850 visual effects shots, which is astounding and very impressive. And I'm going to circle back to VFX shots in just a minute because I want to end on that note. So we'll push a pause button there and in terms of CGI VFX, and we'll move on to practical visual effects. So you have 3 spacecrafts in the movie. You have the Endurance, which is the mothership. Then you have the Ranger, which is like their spaceship that they fly to the planets on. And then you have the Lander, which is the bigger, clunkier spacecraft that they also use to fly onto planets. All 3 of those were created practically. They were made using miniature models that were 3D printed and sculpted and everything else. And the film crew actually referred to them as Maxatures because of how astoundingly huge they were. So there were 2 practical models made of the Endurance, which again, that's the biggest of them. That one's the mothership. They made one of them at 1/15th scale, and that model spanned over 25 feet. And then they made another practical model of the Endurance, which was a pyrotechnic model. This one was only a partial, so it was only part of the Endurance. It wasn't the whole thing, but that model was made at 1/5 scale. There wasn't a report on how big that actually came out to. I'm sure you could do the math, but it wouldn't be accurate because it's only a partial model. But if you think that the whole model at 1/15th scale was 25 feet, partial model at 1/5 scale had to have been ginormous.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. But that was for the end of the movie where Matt Damon tries to dock on the Endurance and he blows up half of it.
Mm-hmm.
They captured that in camera for real by blowing up the 1/5 scale.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the Ranger and the Lander, it didn't say what scale they were made at, but I have how big they were. So the Ranger spanned 46 feet and the Lander spanned 49 feet. And they were big enough to mount an IMAX camera directly onto the ships. So I thought that was pretty wild. And for those of you who don't know, like your traditional camera that like is in the home is handheld, traditional movie cameras over the shoulder. And an IMAX camera is actually pretty hefty. It weighs anywhere from 80 to 100 pounds, and that's all due to the size of the film inside the camera. So an IMAX camera uses the largest size film that any camera can use. So once you start filming, the weight adds up pretty quickly.
Can I say something really quick?
Yeah, go for it.
So I had read also that all of like the film from this movie, if they put it all together, and I can't remember how many tons it was, I want to say 6 tons is how much it weighed, and they had to use a forklift to carry all of that and transport it.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So then, last bit of info that I have on production details, this is circling back to the visual effects. So Dr. Kip Thorne, he's the theoretical physicist. He wrote equations that would enable the tracing of light rays as they traveled through a wormhole or around a black hole. Thorne then gave these equations to engineers who then wrote new CGI rendering software that could plug these equations in and then create accurate simulations. So this is what you were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
This is astounding because some of these shots were so complex, so humongous just in terms of the complexity with the equation and the image that it generated, that it took up to 100 hours to render one single frame of a shot.
Wow.
Over 100 hours for one single frame, and it totaled over 800 terabytes of data. So for those of you who don't know what a terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes. A gigabyte is typically like if you go to a flash drive, or if you go to Walmart, buy a flash drive, and it's like maybe 4 gigabytes or whatever, and you store all your documents on that, this would be 800,000 gigabytes.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, it absolutely mind-boggling. And And then final note on this, and I think this is really incredible, very amazing. So this movie released in 2014. Dr. Kip wrote these equations to basically simulate what a black hole would look like because humans have never seen a black hole. We know about them in theory, but we've never been able to see them. So it's all, theoretical in terms of what they look like. But Dr. Thorne used these equations to simulate what one would look like. In 2019, the Event Horizon Telescope captured the first ever image of a black hole. Dr. Thorne in Interstellar got it right. Using the mathematical equations and theoretical physics, they correctly predicted what a black hole would actually look like 5 years before humans ever captured a picture of one.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
it's impressive.
It's crazy impressive. But it goes to show you that even though there's some crazy numbers out there, there are some really, you hear stuff and you're like, really? How do they know that? That there are people who dedicate their whole lives to studying this stuff. And that even though it does sound outlandish at times, and there is truth in the fact that they don't know everything, that they do get it right sometimes. And this is a great indicator of that. So if you've not seen a picture of it, go Google Event Horizon Telescope black hole, and you'll see a very grainy picture because it's light years away. But you'll see a picture of a black hole that looks very similar to what we see in Interstellar. And that's all I have for production details.
Very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So, John, I'm still trying to decide what I would rate this movie, so I'll start with you.
Okay.
What would you rate this movie, scale of 1 to 100?
That's a tough one, but I think I would give this movie a 97.5.
I was thinking 98.
Were you?
I was.
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of on the fence of 98, just so that I could leave room for other movies.
Right.
But you know what? I'll do it. Let's just say I'll give it a 98 too.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just so good. And I mean, I almost want to give it a 100, but I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if any movie could earn a 100. I don't know.
Maybe. I think I could give The Passion of the Christ a 100.
I don't know if I've seen that one.
We watched it together.
Okay. Well, off topic.
Yeah.
So why would you give it a 98? What do you love about it?
Everything. I mean, honestly, that's bar none the highest score I've given up to this point on the podcast, which granted, this is episode 8, so we haven't done a ton, but still a 98 is a mega score in terms of a movie. And I love this movie. I know you said it earlier, at least I think you did, and I agree with you 1,000%. If I could go back in time and watch this movie again for the first time ever, I would 100% do that. This movie is phenomenal. There's nothing that I don't like about this movie. It's just a great movie. I don't know what else to say. So are you going to stick with the 98 then?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, I mean, first I want to say I'm very proud to say that I introduced John to this movie because he introduced me to like every other movie we've done on this podcast, I think, besides WALL-E.
Yeah.
So I take pride in the fact that I got him on this movie, and that is just so good.
Yes.
But anyways, all that to say, I think the biggest thing, I mean, I'm the same. I love everything about this movie. I don't think there's anything that I would change, but I just remember the first time watching this movie, for me, there's this quote unquote ghost, and for me, I was like, okay, what in the world is going on? Like, obviously there's significance because they wouldn't have put it in the movie if there's not, but like, what is going on? And then it's like, your mind is like blown when you get to the end to find out that, it's Cooper and that he's like in this 5th dimension and like, or whatever, 5-dimensional. I don't remember what the exact.
So he was brought to they called it a tesseract.
Yeah.
But he was brought there by 5-dimensional beings, which you later find out are the humans from the future.
Right.
Who figured out how to get off Earth and save everybody and everything.
Yeah. And it's still hard to wrap my mind around, but it's just like, I really like that kind of movie that like really makes you think, and like it's just like I still, like after watching it, I'm still figuring it out, like obviously everything is explained very well, but there's just so much to it, and I don't know, it's just so good.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really like about the movie is that even though like everything you just said I agree with, that it's like this crazy mind bender movie in one sense. In another sense, it's very simplistic.
Yes, it's very
Like,
linear.
It's
Like,
very linear.
yeah.
It's very easy to follow. It's very, I don't know, it resonates. Like you start with this small town farmer,
Mm-hmm.
and he's widowed. You find out quickly thereafter too.
Mm-hmm.
And he has 2 kids that he's just trying to look out for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the premise of the movie. And that's the through line through the movie, is that he's just trying to protect his kids.
Right.
And I love that. It's an easy premise to get on board with.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take a lot of thought. It's like, okay, this guy is a good guy. I like this guy, and he loves his kids, and that's what he's all about. It doesn't take long to say, okay, I'm behind him. Where are we going next?
Right.
And even despite like all the space travel and all the theoretical physics and everything that's like in play in this movie, because there's a lot of like hardcore physics in this movie, and this movie is praised by the scientific community as one of the most grounded, accurate depictions of science in a science fiction movie in terms of space travel. And like, okay, so we can pause for a minute on what I was about to say, and just like you have the theory of time dilation in here, which is real. That has been proven to be real, that with a more intense gravity, that time does elapse at a different pace.
Mm-hmm.
So that at this point in time, I don't know if it was proven back when the movie was being made, but it is proven today, which is crazy to think about. You could be on one planet and it's 1 hour is 7 minutes here.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just how it works. That's how God created it, which is pretty wild. So you have this like huge, massive concept that's accurately depicted through and through. And then just like with the black hole, they got the imaging correct. And just stuff like that. Like it holds up well, even though it's this science fiction drama. It doesn't come under attack constantly. And even if there are things that it got wrong, which there are things that it got wrong.
Right.
And, I would say some of the more snooty physicists and whatnot are quick to point that out, rather than praise them and applaud them for everything that they got right. Even though there are things that they got wrong, it doesn't feel like, oh, you know what? This is too far out there.
Right.
It never ever feels like that.
Right. There's nothing that's like far-fetched that could like never ever happen necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of have the end where like you're dealing with one instance of the past over and over again.
Yes.
Like
yeah.
that. Okay. Maybe that's one step removed from reality. Or maybe it's 10 steps removed. I don't know, whatever you call it. But even still, outside of that, everything else holds up really, really well.
Right.
And theoretical physicists have even talked about that depiction of Cooper when he's stuck inside the Tesseract and said, that is entirely possible. I'm not saying that it's the truth or anything like that, and that it will happen or can happen or anything like that. But that it is, at least in theory, possible.
Right.
So anyways.
This is off topic, but another thing that I like really appreciate in the movie, because I really struggled with, like him leaving his daughter because they had such a crazy close connection, and, like she was so upset. So I really appreciated that, even though his daughter, when he sees her again, is like elderly and on her deathbed, basically, like I appreciated that he did get to see her again. Because I think
that scene always makes me tear up. Like I usually shed a tear. He walks in and his daughter's now, twice his age or more. And, but he did. He goes and he sees her, and he kept his promise that he'd come back.
Right. I honestly think that it might have knocked my score down a couple points if he didn't get to see his daughter. I think that just, it's very powerful, that scene, and just like,
I agree.
It brings it full circle, I think.
Yeah. I think if they would have excluded that or had her die or something,
Yeah.
I don't think I would rank it quite as high.
Yeah, I agree.
So anyways, circling back to what I was saying a minute ago when I said pause,
Oh, yeah.
in spite of all the like those crazy things that are in the movie, like the time dilation, the black hole, and the fifth dimension, time travel ish, like not quite time travel, but kind of. In spite of all those things, like there's still this really, really strong anchor of a through line where Cooper's motivation is to save his kids as well as save everybody back on Earth and save the planet that they call home. His goal is to get back to see his children, and I already said it once, but I'll say it again. Once they get to, was it Dr. Miller? Her planet, the water planet. I think that was the name.
Well, it was called Miller's Planet.
Miller, yes. So that's Dr. Miller.
Yeah.
Her planet. Once they get there, he says 1 hour is 7 years, make it count. Just, showing that, hey, like I've got a family to get back to. This is the goal. We got to make this count so that we can get back there and see our families again before they're too old or they're dead or whatever. And that's why the very next scene is so devastating once they finally get back up to the Endurance to find out that it's been 23 years that they lost that much time.
Yeah.
There's just, I think one of the things that I really love about this movie is just that even though there are these wild ideas, it's at the core really just a simple story.
Right.
Of a dad who loves his kids, who's trying to be true to himself because he was an astronaut before NASA basically got canceled. They like lost all their funding and everything. And he had to be a farmer. So he's being true to himself and looking out for his kids. And it's a really great story.
Yeah. And one other thing kind of circling back I wanted to mention before was that, later on in the movie when Murph is like the same age as Cooper, we find out was when he left. We find out that Professor Brandt, the one who sent them on the mission, was lying.
Oh, yeah. Michael Caine's character.
Yes, was lying about the mission, like being able to return to Earth and, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that was never part of it. And
which, I'm sorry, this is off topic. He is the grandfather of Anne Hathaway's character.
Right.
Because they're both
either the grandfather or the father. I don't know.
Because they're both Professor Brandt.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
That threw me for a loop.
So they refer to Anne Hathaway's character as Dr. Brandt and him as Professor Brandt.
That's what it is. Because it threw me for a second when you said that, but I forgot that they're related.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways, continue.
So we find out that he was lying. It was never an intention for that team that left to return.
Yep.
And we find out that they had no idea, and that, he was really the only one that knew. It was,
him and then Matt Damon's character.
Yes, you're right.
So I would assume by extension that everybody on the Lazarus mission.
Yes, with Matt Damon's team.
That they all, Dr. Mann, whatever. They all knew that prior to anything else. But they were the only ones who knew. Yeah.
So that really threw a wrench in things, I still remember when I watched it, I was like, okay, all hope is lost. Like he's never coming back. He's never going to see his daughter again, and that kind of thing. So, that made me appreciate even more the ending, that he gets to return, he gets to see his daughter and, that kind of thing.
For sure. Well, it's devastating once you hear that because, they basically hear like, there was no plan to come back. And then Matt Damon's like, I know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And basically confirms it and says that the future is the colony. That's what the plan always was. It was to get you guys out here. And we were betting on the fact that you guys wouldn't leave for that reason alone.
Right.
Which is why we didn't tell you. Which is like absolutely awful.
Right.
First of all. But secondly, just heartbreaking for the audience, but then makes it, like you said, that much more triumphant when they find a way,
right? When
they make it work, because Cooper is relentless. I'm not giving up. We're gonna do this. We're gonna make it happen. And he was kind of forced to make it happen because his original plan was just to get back to the Endurance and they were going home.
Right.
And then Dr. Mann kind of ruined that, which forced them to go into Gargantua, the black hole.
Yeah.
And everything played out the way that it did. But it's just, I mean, everything about this movie is great.
Yeah.
I can't say enough good stuff. I love it. And I mean, honestly, I could be here talking for days. There's as much production detail information as there was when I was researched. There's that much more that I could talk about.
Right.
It's really phenomenal. One thing I do want to talk about is that this is the first movie that I've ever seen Matt Damon in that I despise the character that he's playing.
Yeah. He usually plays like this great guy, you know, like either like an amazing dad or just like an inspirational character of some kind.
Right.
And this character, he's just awful.
Yeah. But credit to Matt Damon.
Yes.
You know, lots of
Great
credit to
acting
Matt
job.
Damon because even when like he betrays the team, well, I mean, really, it's only Cooper that he betrays.
Yeah.
Because it's just Dr. Mann and Cooper out on this mountain, essentially. And Dr. Mann basically tries to kill him. He starts cracking the helmet that Cooper's wearing. And the only thing I can think to myself when that's happening is like, dude, you are such a jerk. And also like, dude, I cannot believe how much of a weirdo you are. Because he's like, do you see your kids, Cooper?
Yeah.
Like just the way he's talking and stuff.
Right.
But I mean, just so much credit to Matt Damon and playing a really unlikable character really, really well.
Yeah. And I mean, at first, when we're first introduced to his character, you feel so much sympathy because like he's in his like, you know, hypersleep thing. He's probably been in there. I don't think it says exactly how long, but years, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't say how long, but when Dr. Mann, Matt Damon, wakes up from his capsule,
he sees Cooper's face.
Yeah, he immediately starts crying because he didn't think he'd ever see anybody again. But we also find out that he says, I didn't set a wake up date.
Right.
You know, he basically was just like, okay, well, this is it. I'm just going into hibernation indefinitely and just going to die, basically.
Yeah. So that, I mean, automatically when you first see it, it's like, oh my gosh, like, you know, you have so much sympathy for him and you like his character.
Yeah.
But then he quickly derails.
Goes and ruins it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah. John, I do have one trivia question for you.
Okay, cool.
So on Miller's planet, you know, like 1 hour is 7 years on Earth.
Yes.
What do you think would be equivalent to 1 second on Miller's planet? So what, like how much time would pass on Earth if there was just 1 second that you were on Miller's planet?
I don't know. I could figure it out, but not off the top of my head. If 1 hour is 7 years, 1 second, I mean, because then you got seconds to minutes, minutes to hours.
Right.
I don't know. 1 second is probably, what is it? Is it like 10 minutes?
No.
On Earth? What is it?
A day and a half. Or is it half a day? Half a day.
Half a day?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It would have to be a lot bigger if 1 hour is 7 years.
Yeah.
So 1 second on Miller's planet is half a day.
Yeah. I believe I did the math right on that.
Wow.
It's very possible I didn't.
That's still wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, is there anything else you want to touch on?
I don't think so. I think this is really a movie that you just have to see. Like it's just so good.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of things that we could be talking about. I think we could be a lot more concise about everything, but I agree with Emily. Just go watch the movie because there's so much in this movie. We could be talking for days, and Em and I talked before we started recording that we needed to be intentional in reeling it back because we would be here well over an hour if we were just talking about everything we want to talk about. There's just too much. It's a great movie. One of my all-time favorite movies. I would say easily top 5 probably.
I would agree.
All-time favorite movies. So go watch it and let us know what you think.
Hopefully we didn't overhype it.
Yeah.
Hopefully you don't watch it with these like
Yeah.
crazy expectations and are let down, but I don't think you will be.
I would hope if you listen this far that you already watched it.
Yes.
Yeah. If you didn't, then you did this to yourself. But anyways, thank you guys for joining us. We really enjoy doing this. Next week is going to be episode 9, and it's going to be our first ever musical. We're going to be covering La La Land. I really did not know how I would feel about that movie the first time I saw it, because you also introduced me to that movie.
I did.
And I love that movie.
It's really good.
It's a really good movie. So if you haven't seen it already, go ahead and watch it. Prepare for next week's episode. But we're going to be talking about La La Land next week. Otherwise, keep a lookout for posts on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Hit that like button. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. We really appreciate you guys, and we're excited to keep doing more. And with that, we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.